And if you want to look at what I thought, why don't you look at what I actually said in Cabinet and what I did?
You announced that your government would not listen to those who say, let the virus rip, nor to those who urge a permanent lockdown when you announced those measures. But the phrase, let the virus rip, and the notion that you as a government would let the virus rip was your own phrase, was it not?
Well, so, no, I'm sad to say there were plenty of people who had used the phrase in conversation with me. I was trying to represent a view which was sadly quite widespread, which was that, as you've said already, the approach might be to segment the most vulnerable and to protect them, and to allow the vast majority of the population who are much less vulnerable to gradually acquire immunity. Now, that was not, as we've discussed repeatedly, an approach that I could take at all. And I was saying that in order to explain to the public why it was not an approach that we were taking, any more than going into permanent lockdown was an approach that we could take. We faced an appalling... The problem with this whole period is that we had come out of... We'd found a way out of lockdown, and we'd got the R below 1, but we didn't yet have either good enough therapeutics or a vaccine. And so our only tools remained NPIs. And the question was, do you go straight back into lockdown, which is what a circuit breaker is? I mean, a circuit breaker sounds like a pretty it's a glib phrase. It actually means an immensely difficult, costly exercise, which falls hardest on the poorest and neediest in society. You then might have to do it again and again. And even then, there's no guarantee that it's going to work. And you don't know what the end state is because you've got no vaccine. And that was why I thought it was sensible to continue to throw everything we had at a combination of intensified national measures plus the regional system, the tiering system.
My question to you was whether or not you, whilst announcing that you would not listen to those who had said, let the virus rip, had used the words used the words yourself. You deny that. So could you please look at the diaries?
Sorry, what I'm saying is that this was a phrase in common parlance at the time, and remains so.
Sir Patrick Vallance's diary is 273901, page 92.
Yes, sir.
Actually having a discussion, a meeting with the PM about, quote, letting it rip, page...
But I don't wish to be
I'm just going to put...
repetitive, but this is exactly what you'd expect me to be talking about at this stage.
Page 245.
This is June 2020.
I'm going to show you all the ones, Mr. Johnson, out of fairness. The Prime Minister meeting begins to argue for letting it rip, saying, yes, there will be more casualties, but so be it. They've had a good innings. 608. 439. We should let it rip a bit. 150. He's obsessed with older people accepting their fate. 230. Obsessed with the average age of death being 82, which is longer, you believe, than the average life expectancy. Get COVID, live longer, you said. 245. You say at the bottom of the page, according to Sir Patrick Vallance, we're in a really tough spot, a complete shambles. I really don't want to do another national lockdown. You are told that if you want to go down this route of letting go, you need to tell people, you need to tell them you're going to allow people to die. Was your position, Mr. Johnson, that in light of your views secretly held about people dying having reached their time anyway, that you were obliged to reject the advice of your advisors that there be a circuit breaker?
No.
That there be no national lockdown until the last possible moment?
No.
And that you would try a tier system?
No. 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 So the implication of the implication that you're trying to draw from those conversations is completely wrong. And my position was that we had to save human life at all ages, and that was the objective of the strategy. And by the way, that is what we did. If you look at what we actually did, never mind the accounts that you have culled from people's jottings from meetings that I've been in. If you look at what I actually said and what I actually did, and there is abundant quotation from me, millions of words that I spoke in Parliament or in press conferences or whatever. If you look at what we actually did, we went into lockdown as soon as we could the first time round, and we sensibly went for a regional approach when the disease picked up again, and then again went into lockdown on the 30th, 31st of October. And I think, frankly, it does not do justice to what we did, our thoughts, our feelings, my thoughts, my feelings, to say that we were remotely reconciled to fatalities across the country, or that I believe that though it was acceptable to let it rip. What I was asking, and I had to do this, I had to, and we covered a lot of this yesterday, but I had to challenge the consensus in the meeting. You've got to understand that these meetings comprised an overwhelming number of very, very talented, brilliant public health officials, civil servants, and so on, and scientists. And I was representing the only layperson in the meeting. Well, apart from the occasion there would be other politicians, but I was basically, I had to speak for everybody who wasn't in the meeting and who wanted these points put to the scientists before I went out to explain them. I had to get their version of why this wasn't the case. Why wasn't it true that as people were continuously saying in the media and elsewhere, that it was the answer was to shield the elderly, protect the elderly, and to let it rip otherwise. I needed to have the counter-arguments.
You supported Mr. Cummings when the Barnard Castle affair exploded in Easter 2020, did you not?
I did.
Well, the material, the suggestion is that Mr. Cummings drove 250 miles to Durham over the weekend of the 27th, 28th, 29th of March at the height of the lockdown with his wife and child, and then on the 12th of April he drove to Barnard Castle. He has said that you knew that he had moved his family out of London on that weekend of the 27th of March. You, the inquiry is aware, have said in a WhatsApp with another official that Mr. Cummings is a total and utter liar. He never told me he'd gone to Durham during lockdown. I only discovered it when the stories came out. He claimed he'd told me, but that he said my brain was so fogged by COVID, I didn't register. But it's not true. I would have noted it. He never told me. Is that the position you take today?
That's what I remember.
The position, though, was, of course, that public confidence in your administration, the United Kingdom government, not, I should say, from the data, the Scottish or Welsh administrations or the Northern Ireland Executive, dipped significantly. There was a very notable drop in confidence in the competence of your government. That obviously was highly regrettable. In the height of a public health crisis of unprecedented proportions, to have that blow to the public confidence in your government's competence was obviously damaging.
It was a bad moment, and I won't pretend otherwise. But actually, I think that what happened thereafter was fascinating in that whatever the rights and wrongs of the position I took on that episode, people continued to want us to get on with the job of fixing the pandemic, and they continue. In spite of what you say about the confidence factor, they continued to be more than willing to work together to defeat the virus, and that's what they did.
Is that right, Mr. Johnson? The same data which established the significant drop in confidence in your government, data from UCL called the COVID-19 Social Study, also appeared to suggest a drop in self-reported adherence to guidance. So there was not just you would say a communication or political or presentation issue, there was a substantive impact.
Well, I can't quantify that. What is certainly true is, as we've discussed a lot over the last couple of days, all MPIs start to degrade over time. Public adherence starts to fray. Whether that episode helped to exacerbate that problem, to the extent to which it did, I just can't judge.
The inquiry, as is everybody well aware, of course, that then the first reports of social gatherings in Number 10 emerged in November of 2021. You were issued with a fixed penalty notice on the 12th of April 2022 relating to an event in Downing Street on the occasion of your birthday, the 19th of June 2020, just a few weeks after the Barnard Castle affair. Putting aside the issue of your own fixed penalty notice, did you, and it's important I ask you this, did you apologise for the impression that had been given that staff in Downing Street take the rules and the regulations less than seriously? You, in fact, I think, described yourself as sickened yourself and furious.
I did, and I repeated that on many occasions.
But you acknowledge, of course, that all the breaches proved to have taken place, but the general behaviour took place in Downing Street on your watch.
I do, but I wish to just to stress, and I've always, and I've been clear from everything I've said. I take full responsibility for everything that the government said or did during the pandemic. I continue to regret very much what happened, but I really want to emphasise, and you talk about the impression, the version of events that has entered the popular consciousness about what is supposed to have happened in Downing Street is a million miles from the reality of what actually happened in Number 10. And I speak on behalf of, I know, of hundreds and hundreds of hard-working civil servants who thought that they were following the rules. And I know, I don't think have been properly characterised by some of the, not just the media coverage, but the dramatic representations that we're now having of this are absolutely absurd. And I want to repeat that. They're a million miles from the reality of what happened.
Mr. Johnson, one of the problems is that I've received a number of messages from bereaved people as I've travelled around the United Kingdom, and so many of them who suffered horrific grief during lockdown. Yes. We all know that it's far more traumatic even than many other kinds of grief. And then I'm afraid Partygate has been called exacerbated.
Of course, and I totally understand their feelings, and what can I do but again apologise for mistakes that we made in number 10. What I'm trying to tell you and to tell the inquiry is that I think that the characterisation, the representation there has been of what civil servants and advisors were doing in number 10 has been a travesty of the truth. They thought they were working very, very hard, which they were, and I certainly thought that what we were doing was, as I've said before, within the rules. So that is in no way to attempt to mitigate the offence that has been caused, and I understand the offence that has been caused, and I apologise for the offence that has been caused. And if I had my time again, of course I'd have done things differently in number 10, and I would have sent repeated messages round saying, please, make sure that everybody can see that you're properly following the guidance. So, frankly, I think, as some of your witnesses have said, it was logistically impossible to do that. But anyway,
Mr. Johnson,
I think people know my views on this.
you say it was a million miles away from the reality of Downing Street. One of your most competent and sterling civil servants, Helen McNamara, said in live evidence to my lady, I'd find it hard to pick one day when the regulations were followed properly inside that building.
But that's the point I'm making. Because are
you saying that this was all a matter of breaches of the regulations on account of
what? If you look at carefully,
the formulaic obligations of walking down corridors and having to work in the building structure of Downing Street.
If you read what Helen said in her evidence to you, I think actually that is what she was driving at. She says there was one meeting where we were able to do things strictly by the absolute letter of the guidance, and it was unsustainable, and that was why the guidance was written in a way so as to allow businesses to have flexibility. And the particulars, I mean, I've been around this issue many times, and forgive me, but the situation in Downing Street, the conditions of work there, we were having to call, as the inquiry has heard, meeting after meeting after meeting, at all hours of the day and night, in rapid succession, and summon people rapidly to different meetings. As Helen McNamara rightly says, in those conditions, it was very hard to follow the letter of the guidance, and I've tried to explain that many times. But I understand the offence that has been caused.
May we have 226-239, page 13, please. This is around that time, the time in the revelation of the partying in Downing Street, a WhatsApp communication between yourself and your Cabinet Secretary. Your Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, was originally obligated to carry out an investigation, but for a variety of reasons which we needn't explore, he did not do so. But in the context of that debate at 23:04 on the 17th of December, Boris Johnson, in retrospect, we all should have told people, above all Lee Kane, to think about their behaviour in number 10 and how it would look. But now we must smash on. So that wasn't about technical breaches of the regulations because of the planning in Downing Street. It was a reference to behaviour, a behaviour of your officials and advisors, and you knew how it would look, but you didn't care that much.
I did care, and to say that I didn't care about what was happening generally is the complete opposite of the truth. And yes, I think that we could have done more in number 10 to insist that people thought about the way their behaviour would be perceived by others. And I made this point repeatedly to the various inquiries that have been held already into this matter. And we should have thought about what it would look like to have people out in the garden when other people were not allowed in the garden, even though the garden was being used as a place of work. But the idea that I didn't, I mean, in your line of questioning, which has been of course excellent throughout, but you've dwelt particularly on WhatsApp exchanges and various things that I'm supposed to have said, which indicate that I didn't care. I did care, and I continue to care passionately about it. And I will, if you want, I haven't talked about this before in public, but and it goes to what you were saying earlier about elderly people and my what you claim is my indifference to the pandemic. I just want to remind you that when I went into intensive care, I saw around me a lot of people who were not actually elderly. And in fact, they were middle-aged men, and they were quite like me. And some of us were going to make it, and some of us weren't. And what I'm trying to tell you, in a nutshell, and the NHS, thank God, did an amazing job and helped me survive. But I knew from that experience what an appalling disease this is. I had absolutely no personal doubt about that from March onwards. To say that I didn't care about the suffering that was being inflicted on the country is simply not right.
Mr. Johnson, I have never suggested you didn't care about the suffering. I suggested you didn't care about the reaction to the behaviour demonstrated, a clear reference on the face of that WhatsApp.
Well, I thank you for that clarification.
What's on the page, in that you describe, well, I'm not going to repeat your words, but a wrong-headed mask policy. There's then an exchange with... Mr. Johnson, I mean, if you're going to dispute that, I will repeat it. Your phrase was totally...
Mr. Jacobs, you're running out of time, so do you want to pursue this? I think you've got an answer.
I think the adjective I used, which I won't repeat, was intended to convey my sense that a mask policy which had been in position 1 was going to have to change because of changing scientific advice and changing appreciation of the value of masks, and that was the reality. It was going to be politically difficult to execute, but we were going to have to do it.
Mr. Johnson, I'll try and deal with my final and different topic very quickly. You've described your concern as to lockdown hitting the poorest. Do you think it's right to say that self-isolation also hit the poorest hardest? And was it understood by you that financial support for self-isolation was one way of mitigating the unequal impacts of the pandemic?
Yes, and well, that's why we had not just the £500 self-isolation payment, but also we increased universal credit by £1,000, working family tax credit by £1,000, and gave councils a very large budget to deal with those who are most in need of help.
Finally, if that's the case, Mr. Johnson, why was it not until the end of September before that payment to which you refer was introduced?
Because for the reasons I think that we discussed earlier, I was anxious. We spent a huge amount supporting the country already through the pandemic. I was anxious about some of the distorting effects of payments to isolate. We discussed the punitive approach, but eventually I thought, well, we better go with some more support as well, and we did.
My lady, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Now, Mr. Stanton is hiding in that corner. I can see him. Mr. Johnson, he chose to sit over there. I was put over there, so don't worry. He's used to seeing her back, because we need you to face towards the microphone, Mr. Johnson. Sorry.
I will.
So if you address your answers to me, then.
Yes.
Thank you, my lady. Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson. I'd like to ask you a question on behalf of the British Medical Association about the removal of legal limits on social contact during the summer of 2021, which has been described as Freedom Day. In his witness statement to the inquiry, Professor Philip Bamfield, the current chair of the BMA, raises concerns about the government's framing of the removal of restrictions in the context of freedom, which sent the wrong message that the threat of the virus had been fully contained. And in Sajid Javid's witness statement, he states that by late autumn and early winter of 2021, many people felt that the pandemic was over, only for protective measures to be needed once again on the 8th of December 2021 in response to the emergence of the Omicron variant, which you've discussed earlier with Mr. Keith. Mr. Johnson, the question is, to what extent do you think that this mistaken belief that the pandemic was over was influenced by government messaging which framed the removal of public health protections as freedom?
Well, I accept people are going to quarrel with some of the language that we chose, and I have a massive respect for the BMA. But I think if you look at the curve of the pandemic and where we are and where we were then in that period of July 2021, what was to go on, the subsequent movement of the epicurve, I think it wasn't an irrational choice of expression. We had been able to get a huge amount of resistance into the arms of the British public, but I think by that stage, vaccinated all the elderly and vulnerable. It was an amazing achievement, and I didn't think it was an inappropriate way to talk about it. And as I said in my answer to the gentleman from the TUC, I was concerned that we were going to remain too cautious for too long. I think we needed to understand that we'd achieved a great deal, and that if it wasn't quite the end, it was at least the beginning of the end.